It started with an email I almost ignored. The subject line read, "Point Haven disappearances, it's watching." As a private investigator, my inbox is filled with messages from conspiracy theorists, grieving families, and thrill seekers chasing shadows. I almost deleted it, but something stopped me. Maybe it was the chilling simplicity of the words, or the attached photograph of a small, decaying town surrounded by dense woods. The photo showed nothing extraordinary at first glance, just an ordinary town. But there was something unsettling in the grainy sky above. Two faint, glowing red lights, hovering just above the tree line. Curiosity got the better of me. The email's sender, identified only as a concerned citizen, claimed that Point Haven, a dying industrial town on the edge of a sprawling forest, had become the epicenter of strange occurrences. The disappearances of two teenagers, sightings of a winged figure, and an atmosphere thick with dread had the locals spooked. Most attributed the events to the legendary Mothman, a creature I'd written off as folklore for the gullible. Still, I couldn't ignore the details. The first disappearance had occurred near the Iron Creek Bridge, where workers claimed to have seen a creature perched on the beams just before the incident. Skepticism drove me as much as intrigue. I didn't believe in monsters, but I'd solved enough cases involving human predators to know that urban legends often mask darker truths. If someone was using the Mothman myth to cover their tracks, I intended to find out. The drive to Point Haven was uneventful, a 3-hour stretch of winding roads and overcast skies. The closer I got, the quieter the world seemed. Even the hum of the car engine felt muted, swallowed by the oppressive silence that hung over the landscape. I arrived just before sunset. The town was exactly as the photograph had shown. A ghostly collection of weathered buildings, most boarded up or sagging under years of neglect. The Iron Creek Bridge loomed in the distance, its rusted beams like skeletal fingers reaching for the sky. As I parked outside the town's only motel, I felt the weight of unseen eyes on me. It wasn't just paranoia. The townsfolk watched me from behind curtains and half-closed blinds, their faces pale and wary. I checked in quickly, the clerk barely making eye contact as he slid me a key. "You're here for the stories, aren't you?" he asked, his voice low. I nodded and he sighed. "Just be careful. It's not just a story anymore." The next morning, I started my investigation in earnest. The diner was the closest thing Point Haven had to a hub. Its chipped counters and faded linoleum floors, a meeting place for locals who had nowhere else to go. Over coffee that tasted more like burnt water, I struck up conversations with the regulars. Most were tight-lipped, but a few offered fragments of stories, strange screeches in the night, livestock found mutilated, and always the eyes. One woman, Clara, was braver than the others. She told me about her nephew, Eli, who had vanished 3 months earlier. "He was walking home from the bridge," she said, her voice trembling. "He called me right before it happened. Said there was something in the trees, something with wings." She paused, tears welling in her eyes. "I told the police, but they don't care. They just say it's the forest playing tricks." I pressed her for more details, and she reluctantly mentioned the steel mill on the outskirts of town. "That's where it hides," she whispered. "Everyone knows, but no one will go there." Her words painted a grim picture. The mill was a rusting husk, long abandoned after the collapse of Point Haven's economy. But it was more than just an eyesore. It was a magnet for fear. A place where shadows seemed to gather and whispers carried on the wind. Armed with Clara's account, I decided to explore the bridge that evening. The Iron Creek Bridge was a relic of another era, its metal framework groaning under the strain of time. I parked my car a short distance away and approached on foot, the fading light casting long shadows across the structure. The air was heavy, each breath tinged with the metallic tang of rust. As I stood there, scanning the surrounding forest, a sound broke the stillness, a low, rhythmic noise like the beating of massive wings. My pulse quickened as I searched the sky, but the sound faded as quickly as it had come. I was alone, yet the feeling of being watched was stronger than ever. Before leaving, I noticed something near the base of the bridge, deep gouges in the metal, as if claws had raked across it. The next morning, I couldn't shake the memory of the bridge or the stories I'd heard. If the steel mill truly was the heart of the mystery, then that's where I needed to go. The drive there was uneventful, the road cutting through a dense forest that seemed to grow darker with each passing mile. When I finally arrived, the sight of the mill sent a shiver down my spine. It was a monolithic structure, its rusting towers and crumbling walls standing as a testament to decades of abandonment. The entrance was partially caved in, but I managed to squeeze through a gap in the rubble. Inside, the air was thick and stale, carrying the faint scent of decay. The floor was littered with debris shards of glass, rusted tools, and what looked like old nests made of shredded fabric and bones. The deeper I ventured, the darker it became, the narrow shafts of light from broken windows doing little to dispel the gloom. I found the first real sign of something unnatural near the center of the mill. A series of claw marks carved deep into the metal walls. They were long and jagged, as if something powerful had dragged its talons across the surface. Nearby, I discovered a crude altar, a flat slab of stone surrounded by what appeared to be offerings. Shiny trinkets, small animal skulls, and blackened feathers. The sight sent a chill through me. This wasn't just an abandoned building, it was a shrine. Suddenly I heard it again. The sound of wings, slow and deliberate, echoing through the vast space. My flashlight flickered as I spun around, the beam casting fleeting shadows on the walls. And then I saw them, two glowing red eyes staring at me from the rafters above. My breath caught in my throat as the figure unfurled its wings. Their span so massive they seemed to block out the light entirely. The Mothman was real. The moment our eyes locked, I froze. Those red orbs burned with a strange, malevolent intelligence, their glow almost hypnotic in the gloom of the steel mill. My breath caught, and the world around me seemed to narrow, as though the creature's presence sucked all the air from the room. The Mothman didn't move immediately. It just stared, its massive wings folded but trembling slightly as if preparing to unfurl. Then, with a low, resonant screech that echoed through the cavernous space, it launched itself from the rafters. The sheer force of its wings sent a gust of wind through the mill, scattering debris and extinguishing the faint light filtering through the broken windows. My flashlight flickered wildly as I stumbled backward, tripping over rubble and falling hard onto the concrete floor. The creature swooped down. Passing so close, I felt the rush of air against my face and the faint brush of its leathery wings. Panic overtook me, and I scrambled to my feet, clutching the flashlight like a lifeline. I ran, weaving through the maze of rusted machinery and toppled beams, my heartbeat deafening in my ears. Behind me, the sound of those massive wings grew louder, punctuated by that same terrible screech. It wasn't just chasing me, it was herding me, driving me deeper into the mill. I turned a corner and found myself in a dead-end room, the walls closing in around me. My light landed on a steel staircase leading to an overhead catwalk. Without thinking, I climbed, each step groaning under my weight. The air grew colder as I ascended, my breath forming small clouds that hung in the stillness. When I reached the top, I crouched low, hoping to hide among the shadows. The creature's screeches stopped, replaced by an eerie silence. My flashlight beam wavered, revealing nothing but empty air below. For a brief, fleeting moment, I thought I might have lost it. Then I heard it, a slow, deliberate scraping sound, like claws dragging against metal. The noise grew louder, closer, until the creature appeared at the far end of the catwalk. Its wings spread wide, blocking my escape. The red eyes glowed brighter, and the air around me seemed to vibrate with an almost electric energy. I had no choice. I ran straight for it, hoping to slip past, but as I approached, it let out a deafening screech and lunged. I dropped my flashlight in the chaos, and the world plunged into darkness. I woke up in the woods, the cold ground pressing against my back. For a moment I thought I was dreaming, the events of the night before a figment of my overactive imagination. But the ache in my body and the deep scratches on my arm told me otherwise. My flashlight and bag were gone, likely left behind in the mill. My car, thankfully, was still parked where I'd left it. The drive back to the motel was a blur, my mind clouded by exhaustion and fear. Every shadow on the road seemed to move, every tree branch a winged figure waiting to strike. When I finally reached my room, I locked the door and collapsed onto the bed, my hands trembling uncontrollably. That night, the nightmares began. I dreamed of the Mothman, its red eyes burning holes into my skull. I dreamed of the bridge collapsing, of screams and rushing water, of wings blocking out the sky. When I woke, the air felt thick with something unseen, a presence I couldn't explain. The motel room felt wrong, the shadows too long and the silence too loud. In the days that followed, I threw myself deeper into the investigation. hoping logic and reason would drown out the growing paranoia. I combed through old newspaper archives, interviewed more locals, and pieced together a grim pattern. The Mothman wasn't just a harbinger of death, it was a warning. Every major tragedy in Point Haven's history, from the fire at the mill to the collapse of the Iron Creek Bridge decades ago, had been preceded by sightings of the creature. The closer I got to the truth, the stranger things became. Electronics in my motel room flickered on and off, even when unplugged. Birds gathered outside my window in unnatural numbers, their unblinking eyes fixed on me. One night, I woke to find deep scratches on the wooden desk in my room, the marks eerily similar to the gouges I'd seen in the mill. Then came the note. Slipped under my door, it was written in shaky, almost illegible handwriting. It knows you're here. Leave before it's too late. Despite the warning, I couldn't leave. Something about the Mothman, the way it watched, the way it moved, fascinated me as much as it terrified me. I needed answers, and I knew the steel mill held them. With the town's connection to the creature becoming clearer, I felt compelled to go back, even if it meant facing whatever awaited me. I returned to the mill on a moonless night, armed with a new flashlight, a knife, and a recorder. The air was colder than before, the silence heavier, as though the forest itself was holding its breath. The entrance loomed ahead like a gaping maw, swallowing the faint beam of my light. The inside of the mill was unchanged, still a labyrinth of rusted machinery, still littered with debris. But something felt different. The air carried a faint hum, a low-frequency vibration that made my teeth ache. I followed it, my footsteps echoing through the empty space until I reached the altar. It had changed. The objects I'd seen before were gone, replaced by something far more disturbing, a row of small, human-like figures made of sticks and feathers, their hollow eyes staring blankly at me. The air around the altar shimmered faintly, like heat rising from asphalt, and the hum grew louder. Then I felt it, a presence, heavy and oppressive, like a hand pressing down on my chest. The Mothman emerged from the shadows, its massive form barely fitting within the confines of the room. Its eyes burned brighter than ever, and its wings stretched wide, casting the altar in darkness. This time it didn't wait. It lunged, its claws slashing through the air as I dove to the side. My flashlight shattered against the floor, plunging us into darkness. I fumbled for the recorder in my pocket, hoping to capture the sound of its screeches, but the creature knocked it from my hands with a single swipe. In the chaos, I grabbed the knife and swung blindly. The blade connected, and the Mothman let out a deafening screech, its wings battering me with enough force to send me sprawling. I hit the ground hard, pain radiating through my ribs. When I looked up, the creature was gone, but its presence lingered, heavy and suffocating. I left the steel mill bruised, bloodied, and trembling. The Mothman's screech still echoed in my ears, its glowing eyes seared into my memory. But something had shifted. For the first time, I felt as though I understood the creature not fully, but enough to realize it wasn't mindlessly hunting me. It had been trying to send a message, though I couldn't yet decipher it. As I drove back to the motel, the pieces began to fall into place. Every disaster in Point Haven's history had been preceded by sightings of the Mothman. The fire that claimed the lives of the steel mill workers, the factory collapse, and the infamous Iron Creek Bridge tragedy from 50 years ago, when the structure gave way during a storm, plunging dozens of cars into the icy river below. What if the Mothman wasn't a predator but a harbinger, a warning of something terrible to come? I didn't have to wait long for confirmation. That night, as I sat at the motel desk poring over old maps and newspaper clippings, the nightmares began again. This time, they were more vivid than before. I stood on the Iron Creek Bridge as a torrential downpour turned the asphalt slick and treacherous. A single car skidded, hitting the railing, and the entire bridge began to collapse. Screams filled the air as vehicles plunged into the water. Hovering above it all was the Mothman, its wings outstretched, its red eyes piercing through the chaos. I jolted awake, drenched in sweat. My heart raced as I checked the clock. 4:12 a.m. The dream felt more like a vision, a premonition of something imminent. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, pulling me further from my haze of fear. It was a news alert. Structural issues reported on Iron Creek Bridge. Repairs scheduled for next week. Panic gripped me. If the dream was a warning, then waiting until next week would be too late. I had to do something. But what? Who would believe me? My mind raced as I grabbed my keys and headed for the bridge. When I arrived, the early morning fog clung to the riverbanks, shrouding the bridge in an eerie mist. The structure loomed like a skeletal ghost, its rusted beams groaning in the damp air. I parked my car a safe distance away and approached on foot, my flashlight slicing through the fog. The closer I got, the heavier the atmosphere became. The air felt electric, charged with a tension I couldn't explain. And then, as if summoned by my presence, I saw them. Two glowing red eyes staring at me from the far end of the bridge. The Mothman was waiting. The creature didn't move as I approached, its massive form silhouetted against the fog. It perched on one of the bridge's rusted beams, its wings folded but quivering slightly, as if ready to take flight. I stopped halfway across the bridge, my breath coming in shallow gasps. The Mothman's gaze never wavered. "What do you want?" I shouted, my voice trembling. "Why are you here?" The creature let out a low, resonant screech, the sound vibrating through the air like a warning bell. And then the ground beneath me began to shake. The bridge groaned, its beams straining under the weight of years of decay. I turned just in time to see a large section of the structure give way, the asphalt crumbling into the river below. A car skidded to a stop mere feet from the edge, the driver's face pale with terror as they reversed and sped back towards safety. The Mothman spread its wings, taking flight with a powerful thrust that sent a gust of wind ripping through the fog. It circled the bridge, its glowing eyes fixed on the collapsing structure. The vibrations grew stronger, cracks spidering across the asphalt beneath my feet. "Get off the bridge!" I screamed, waving frantically at the few cars still attempting to cross. Most obeyed, speeding toward the other side, but one driver hesitated, frozen in fear. I ran toward their car, pounding on the hood. "Move!" The driver snapped out of their stupor and accelerated just as another section of the bridge gave way. I stumbled back, my ankle twisting painfully as I hit the ground. The Mothman swooped low, its screech piercing through the chaos. For a moment I thought it was coming for me, but it veered away, its massive wings casting shadows over the river. Then, with a deafening roar, the central span of the bridge collapsed, sending the remaining vehicles plummeting into the water below. The sound of shattering metal and rushing water filled the air, followed by the distant cries of those who had survived the fall. I lay on the ground gasping for breath as the Mothman disappeared into the fog. The collapse of the Iron Creek Bridge made national headlines, but the official explanation was as mundane as I'd feared. Structural failure, exacerbated by years of neglect and recent heavy rains, was the conclusion investigators offered to the public. No mention of a winged figure or the warnings I'd tried to deliver. I stayed in Point Haven for a few days, watching as rescue crews worked tirelessly to recover bodies and survivors. The weight of guilt settled over me like a shroud. Could I have done more? Should I have called the authorities the moment I suspected something was wrong? Or would they have dismissed me as a lunatic, as so many others had? When I finally left, the town was quieter than ever, its residents shaken but resigned. The Mothman sighting stopped after the bridge collapse, as if the creature had delivered its message and moved on. But for me, the nightmare wasn't over. Even now, back in the safety of my apartment, I can't escape the feeling that I'm being watched. The red eyes haunt my dreams, and sometimes, late at night, I hear the faint sound of wings outside my window. I've tried to convince myself it's just the wind, but deep down I know the truth. The Mothman doesn't just warn of disasters. It leaves a mark on those who see it.